My name is Emily, a 30-year-old marketing manager living in a bustling city. I've been in a relationship with Ethan, a freelance photographer, for 3 years. Our relationship has had its ups and downs, but I always believed we had a strong connection, one that could withstand any challenge. That belief was put to the test when my college friend, Claire, moved to the city. Claire and I had been close during university, but lost touch over the years as we pursued different careers. Her move back was a chance to reconnect, and I welcomed her warmly. Claire was always the life of the party, bubbly, confident, and quick to charm everyone around her. At first, I didn't think much of it when Ethan and Claire hit it off. They shared common interests, photography, hiking, and a love for jazz music. Ethan was a social butterfly, so it was no surprise that he enjoyed chatting with Claire. But over time, I noticed subtle things that began to bother me. Claire seemed to laugh a little too hard at Ethan's jokes, even the mundane ones. She was quick to compliment his work, calling his photographs the most captivating she'd ever seen. While flattery wasn't unusual for Claire, her enthusiasm felt over the top. And then there were the touches, light, seemingly casual brushes of her hand against his arm or shoulder when they talked. These weren't frequent enough to raise alarm immediately, but they happened just often enough to make me uncomfortable. One evening, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Besides Claire, I had invited a few other friends. Throughout the evening, I noticed that Claire kept finding reasons to engage Ethan in conversation. She sat next to him at the table, leaned in closely as they talked, and laughed louder than necessary at his jokes. I tried to push aside the unease I felt, reminding myself that Claire was just being friendly. But when she followed Ethan into the kitchen to help with drinks, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. After the guests had left, I decided to address my concerns with Ethan. As we sat on the couch, I said, "Ethan, don't you think Claire's been a little too friendly with you lately?" He looked at me, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "She's your friend, Em. She's just being nice." "She is nice," I admitted. "But it feels like more than that. She laughs at everything you say, she's always touching your arm, and she seems to find any excuse to talk to you. It's strange." Ethan sighed and pulled me into a hug. "You're overthinking this.
Claire is just outgoing.
She probably feels comfortable with us because you're her closest friend here." Though his words were meant to reassure me, they didn't ease my unease. Instead, they planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. In the following weeks, Claire's behavior became even more suspicious. She started texting Ethan about trivial things, like asking for recommendations on where to photograph sunsets. This struck me as odd because she had never shown interest in photography before. One evening, I came home from work to find Claire sitting in my living room, chatting with Ethan. She was sipping tea, laughing at something he said. My stomach knotted at the sight. "Claire," I said, masking my discomfort with a smile, "I didn't know you were stopping by." She smiled back, unbothered. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd return the book I borrowed from you." Ethan added, "I told her to wait here until you got home. I figured you wouldn't mind." I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, irritation bubbled. It felt like Claire was taking liberties she wasn't entitled to. The tipping point came during a weekend barbecue I hosted for a few close friends. It was supposed to be a relaxing afternoon, but Claire's presence turned it into an exercise in restraint. She seemed determined to monopolize Ethan's attention. She laughed at all his jokes, even ones I knew he recycled, and stayed glued to his side, asking him endless questions about his photography. At one point, I excused myself to grab something from the kitchen. When I returned, I saw Claire and Ethan standing close together in a corner of the yard, laughing softly. The distance between them was far too intimate for my comfort. As I approached, they noticed me and stepped apart quickly, as if caught. That night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. After the last guest had left, I confronted Ethan. "Why was Claire standing so close to you earlier?" I demanded, crossing my arms. Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" "We were just chatting about her new job." "It didn't look like just chatting," I snapped. "She's always finding reasons to be near you. Don't you see how inappropriate this is?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Emily. Claire's your friend. What do you want me to do? Be rude to her? I want you to set boundaries, I replied firmly. Make it clear that you're not interested in anything beyond being polite. Ethan sighed heavily. There's nothing to clarify because there's nothing going on. Claire isn't interested in me, and I'm definitely not interested in her. Please, just let this go. But I couldn't let it go. Something about their interactions felt off, and I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. Despite Ethan's insistence that there was nothing to worry about, I couldn't shake the feeling that Claire's intentions weren't as innocent as he believed. My discomfort only grew in the following days. Claire began showing up more frequently, often unannounced. She'd bring over pastries or coffee for quick chats with Ethan, and though she always tried to include me in the conversation, her focus seemed unmistakably fixed on him. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find Ethan in the living room, editing photos on his laptop, while Claire sat beside him. She was leaning over his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair as she commented on the images. I stood there for a moment unnoticed, before clearing my throat loudly. Both of them turned to look at me, Claire flashing her usual bright smile. Good morning, Emily. Hope I didn't wake you. I just dropped by to see if Ethan could give me some pointers on photography. I forced a polite smile. No worries. I'll make some coffee. As I moved into the kitchen, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in my own home. The sound of their laughter carried through the walls, fueling my frustration. The breaking point came a week later during another casual gathering. This time, it was a small dinner at a friend's house. Claire had been invited, of course, and she wasted no time making herself comfortable near Ethan. Throughout the evening, I watched as she laughed at his jokes, complimented his every comment, and even brushed her hand against his when passing him a drink. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I might be overreacting. But when Claire leaned in to whisper something to Ethan and he laughed in response, my patience snapped. On the car ride home, I finally voiced my frustration. Ethan, are you seriously not seeing what's happening here? I asked, my voice tense. What now, Emily? He replied, sighing.
Claire.
She's practically throwing herself at you. It's embarrassing. Ethan glanced at me briefly before turning his attention back to the road. You're imagining things. She's your friend, Emily. She's just being friendly. Why are you so fixated on this? Because it's not normal. I snapped. No one acts like that unless they're trying to make a move. Ethan shook his head, clearly frustrated. I don't know what you want me to do. Ignore her? Be rude? She hasn't done anything wrong, and neither have I. I crossed my arms, leaning back in my seat. I want you to stop encouraging her. She needs to understand that you're not available. Ethan didn't respond, and the rest of the drive passed in tense silence. The next day, I decided I needed to confront Claire directly. It was clear that Ethan wasn't going to address the issue, so I had to take matters into my own hands. I invited her out for coffee under the guise of catching up. When we sat down at a quiet cafe, Claire was her usual cheerful self, chatting enthusiastically about her work and her plans for the weekend. I waited for a pause before steering the conversation toward the topic I dreaded most. Claire, I began, trying to keep my tone steady, I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Ethan lately. She smiled, her expression unbothered. Oh yeah, he's been so helpful with my photography. I'm learning so much from him. I hesitated before continuing. I appreciate that, but I feel like some of your interactions with him have been a bit inappropriate. Her smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of confusion. Inappropriate? What do you mean? I took a deep breath. The way you laugh at everything he says, the constant texting, the casual touches, it's making me uncomfortable, Claire. She stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable, before letting out a soft laugh. Emily, are you serious? Ethan and I are just friends. I would never do anything to hurt you. Her words sounded sincere, but there was something in her tone that felt dismissive, as though she couldn't believe I was even bringing this up. I know you don't mean to hurt me, I said carefully, but your actions are crossing boundaries. I need you to respect our relationship. Claire's expression hardened slightly. Emily, I think you're overreacting. Maybe you're feeling insecure, but I promise you, there's nothing going on between Ethan and me. Her response stung, but I held my ground. This isn't about insecurity.
It's about respect.
Please, Claire, just be mindful. She nodded reluctantly, though her expression remained guarded.
Fine.
If it makes you feel better, I'll back off. Over the next few days, Claire kept her word, at least on the surface. She stopped dropping by unannounced and limited her texting to occasional messages. But despite her efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Ethan seemed distant, and I caught him glancing at his phone more often than usual. One evening, as he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the table beside me. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Claire. Can we talk? I really need to see you. My heart sank. I put the phone down quickly, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. When Ethan came out of the bathroom, I confronted him. Why is Claire texting you about meeting up? He looked startled.
What?
She's probably just asking about photography. I shook my head. Don't lie to me, Ethan. She said she needs to see you. What's going on? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Emily, you're making this into something it's not. Claire is going through a tough time at work. She probably just needs advice. Advice? I echoed, my voice rising. At what point does this become more than just advice, Ethan? Because it feels like we're already there. He didn't answer, and the silence that followed was deafening. The tension in our relationship was palpable after that confrontation. Ethan grew increasingly defensive whenever I brought up Claire, and I felt more isolated than ever. I wanted to believe him, to trust that there was nothing going on, but my instincts wouldn't let me. A week later, I was working late and decided to head home early as a surprise. When I entered the apartment, I heard muffled voices coming from the living room. Quietly, I made my way down the hallway and stopped just short of the doorway. I peeked inside to see Claire and Ethan sitting on the couch. She was leaning in close, her hand resting lightly on his knee. They were speaking in hushed tones, and the look on Claire's face was unmistakable. She wasn't just seeking advice. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding. What's going on here? They both jumped, startled by my sudden presence. Claire quickly pulled her hand away, while Ethan stood up, his face a mixture of guilt and irritation. Emily, this isn't what it looks like, he said quickly. Then what is it, Ethan? I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Because it looks like you're crossing every boundary I've ever set. Claire stood, her expression a mix of defiance and embarrassment. Emily calmed down. We were just talking. Talking? I repeated, my voice rising. You call this talking? With your hand on his knee and that look on your face. Ethan stepped between us, trying to de-escalate the situation. Emily, stop. You're blowing this out of proportion. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes.
No, Ethan.
I'm finally seeing things for what they are. You've been lying to me, both of you. Claire's expression shifted from defensive to remorseful. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said softly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Didn't mean for what to happen? Ethan sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Emily, nothing happened.
I swear.
But maybe I let things get too friendly. Too friendly? I repeated, my voice shaking. You think this is just friendliness? This is betrayal, Ethan. From both of you. I couldn't stay in the apartment that night. I grabbed a bag and left, ignoring Ethan's pleas for me to stay and talk. I needed space to think, to process what I had just witnessed. Over the next few days, I avoided both of them. Ethan texted and called repeatedly, apologizing and begging me to come home, but I wasn't ready to face him. Claire, on the other hand, stayed silent. It wasn't until I ran into our mutual friend, Hannah, that I learned the full extent of the betrayal. Emily, Hannah said hesitantly, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I saw Ethan and Claire together at a coffee shop last week. They looked close. My stomach dropped. Close how? They were sitting on the same side of the booth, she said reluctantly. And Claire was holding his hand. The confirmation of my worst fears left me reeling. I had suspected there was more going on, but hearing it from someone else made it undeniable. I decided it was time to confront Claire one last time. I couldn't move forward without answers. I called her and asked to meet, and to my surprise, she agreed. When we sat down at a cafe, she looked uneasy, avoiding my gaze. Claire, I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I need you to be honest with me. What's really going on between you and Ethan? She hesitated, fidgeting with her cup. Emily, I swear we didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened. What happened? I pressed, leaning forward. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. It started out innocent, just conversations and hanging out. But then, I realized I had feelings for him. Her words felt like a knife to my chest. And Ethan? Claire nodded slowly. He said he cared about you, but he admitted he felt something for me too. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. You both lied to me. You let me think I was crazy for suspecting something when the whole time you were betraying me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted it to get this far. But her apology felt hollow. The damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. That night, I went back to the apartment to confront Ethan. He was sitting on the couch, looking weary and defeated. We need to talk, I said, standing in the doorway. He nodded, motioning for me to sit, but I stayed where I was. I talked to Claire, I said bluntly. She told me everything. Ethan's face paled. Emily, Don't, I interrupted. I don't want to hear your excuses. I just want to know why. Why did you do this to me? He looked down at his hands, struggling to find the words. I didn't mean to hurt you. I care about you, Emily. But with Claire, things got confusing. Confusing? I repeated, my voice rising. You mean you didn't have the decency to tell me you were falling for someone else? Instead, you let me doubt myself, let me think I was the problem. I didn't know how to handle it, he admitted. I thought I could fix things without losing you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You've lost me anyway. With that, I walked out of the apartment for the last time, leaving Ethan to sit in the wreckage of what he had destroyed. Leaving Ethan felt like walking away from a life I had carefully built over 3 years, but I knew it was the only choice I could make. Betrayal this deep wasn't something I could forgive, nor did I want to try. For the first few days, I stayed at a friend's apartment, letting the shock and anger settle into a dull ache. Ethan kept trying to contact me, leaving messages and voicemails that ranged from heartfelt apologies to desperate pleas for me to come back. I ignored every one of them. The thought of his voice, full of the same excuses he'd given me that night, made me sick to my stomach. Claire, on the other hand, was silent. She didn't call, text, or try to explain herself further. I wasn't sure if her silence came from guilt or indifference, but either way, I was grateful for the distance. A week after I left Ethan, I received an unexpected message from Hannah. Hey, just wanted to let you know, Claire's been acting weird at work. Thought you might want to know. I frowned at the text, debating whether to ask for more details. Ultimately, curiosity won. What do you mean weird? I replied. Hannah's response came quickly. She's been distracted, keeps disappearing during lunch breaks. People are talking. The idea that Claire was now dealing with fallout of her own brought me a small, bitter sense of satisfaction. I wasn't proud of it, but after everything she had done, it felt like she deserved a taste of the chaos she'd created. Later that evening, I decided to check my email. Amid the usual work correspondence, there was one message that stood out, an email from Claire. The subject line read, I owe you an explanation. For a moment, I considered deleting it without reading. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Subject, I owe you an explanation. Emily, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I've spent the past week replaying everything in my head, trying to understand how I let things spiral so far out of control. What I did to you was unforgivable. I crossed lines that I had no right to, and I've lost one of the best friends I've ever had because of it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I was selfish, Emily. I let my feelings for Ethan cloud my judgment, and I ignored how much it would hurt you. I told myself it wasn't serious, that it didn't mean anything, but the truth is, I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I don't know if this means anything to you, but Ethan and I are not together. After you left, he tried to reach out to me, but I realized that I couldn't face him. I couldn't face what I had done. You didn't deserve this. You deserved better from both of us. I'll leave you alone now, but I just wanted you to hear this from me.
Claire.
I stared at the email for a long time, unsure how to feel. Her words seemed genuine, but they didn't erase the damage she had done. Part of me wanted to reply, to tell her exactly how much pain she had caused. But another part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. I closed my laptop and resolved to focus on moving forward. In the days that followed, I began rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, spent more time with friends, and started exploring hobbies I had neglected during my relationship with Ethan. Slowly, the weight of the betrayal began to lift, replaced by a growing sense of freedom. One afternoon, as I was walking through the park, my phone buzzed with a message from Hannah. "You'll never believe what just happened," it read. "What now?" I replied, half expecting it to be about Claire again. "It's about Ethan. He showed up at my place last night, asking if I knew where you were. He's a mess, Emily." I sighed, the familiar mix of anger and sadness rising to the surface. "What did you say?" "I told him to leave you alone," Hannah replied. "You've moved on, and he needs to do the same." I smiled at her loyalty, grateful to have someone in my corner. The final straw came a few weeks later, when I ran into Ethan at a gallery opening. It was a small, intimate event, and I hadn't expected to see him there. He spotted me almost immediately and made his way over, his expression hesitant. "Emily," he began, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, keeping my tone neutral. "What's there to talk about?" He shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to apologize. For everything. I messed up, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret what happened." His words were earnest, but they didn't have the effect he seemed to hope for. "Ethan," I said firmly, "I've heard enough apologies. What I needed from you was honesty, and you couldn't give me that when it mattered. It's too late now." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I understand. I just wanted you to know." I walked away without looking back, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I reflected on everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the loss, they had all been overwhelming at first. But now, I felt stronger, more sure of myself. I didn't need Ethan's validation or Claire's to move forward. I had survived the worst, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. As weeks turned into months, the chaos that had once consumed my life began to fade into the background. I found comfort in routine, rediscovering the parts of myself that had been overshadowed during my relationship with Ethan. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter on weekends, taking pottery classes, and even planning a solo trip to Italy, a dream I had shelved for years. The change wasn't immediate, nor was it easy. There were still nights when the weight of what had happened hit me, when I lay awake wondering what I could have done differently to prevent the betrayal. But over time, those nights grew fewer and farther between. One afternoon, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled across a post from Claire. It was a photo of her at a beach, smiling with a group of friends. The caption read, "Sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the biggest growth." I stared at the photo for a moment, debating whether to click on her profile. My curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself scrolling through her recent posts. It seemed she had left the city and moved to a quieter coastal town. Her life appeared peaceful, far removed from the whirlwind she had created months earlier. For a brief moment, I considered reaching out. Not to rekindle our friendship, but to let her know that I had moved on and harbored no ill will. But then I realized that doing so wouldn't bring me peace. I had already let go of the anger and pain. Reaching out to her would only open old wounds, and I was determined to keep them closed. My solo trip to Italy turned out to be transformative. Walking through the cobblestone streets of Florence, marveling at the art in Rome, and savoring gelato in Venice reminded me of the beauty that life still had to offer. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly alive. It was in Venice on the last day of my trip that I met someone who would unexpectedly reshape my view on love and trust. His name was Daniel, an architect from London who was also traveling alone. We struck up a conversation while waiting in line at a local cafe, bonding over our shared fascination with the city's architecture. Our connection was effortless, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. By the time we parted ways that evening, we had exchanged numbers and tentative plans to keep in touch. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. I continued to focus on myself, but Daniel and I stayed in contact. Our conversations were light and easy at first, sharing travel photos, talking about favorite books, and comparing notes on our next adventures. But as the weeks turned into months, those conversations grew deeper. Daniel's presence in my life felt like a breath of fresh air. He was kind, patient, and understanding, qualities I hadn't realized I had been missing. Though the thought of opening myself up to someone again was terrifying, I found myself wanting to take the risk. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, I received a call from Hannah. "Guess who just showed up at my office?" she said without preamble. I frowned.
Who?
"Ethan," she replied. "He was there to pitch some photography work for a client. He asked about you." My stomach twisted at the mention of his name. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if you were seeing anyone." I told him it wasn't any of his business. I laughed, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thanks, Hannah. I appreciate it."
You're welcome, she said.
"But seriously, are you okay? Hearing about him again, I thought for a moment before answering. "Yeah, I'm okay. Honestly, I'm more than okay. I've moved on." And I meant it. Daniel visited my city a few months later, and our connection only deepened. We spent the weekend exploring together, visiting museums, trying out new restaurants, and sharing stories late into the night. For the first time since my world had been turned upside down, I felt hopeful about the future. When he left, I didn't feel the familiar pang of insecurity or doubt that had haunted me in the past. Instead, I felt secure in the knowledge that I had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable of navigating whatever came next. Ethan and Claire became distant memories, their roles in my life reduced to lessons learned. The betrayal that once felt insurmountable had become a chapter one could look back on with a sense of clarity and growth. Life, I realized, wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about learning how to rise above it. And for the first time in a long while, I was ready to embrace everything it had to offer. Months passed, and with them, the wounds of betrayal continued to heal. My life was no longer defined by what Ethan and Claire had done, but by the steps I was taking to reclaim my happiness. It was liberating to finally feel like the main character in my own story again. Work was thriving, and I had taken on a few exciting projects that pushed me creatively. I'd also rekindled old friendships, reaching out to people I had unintentionally distanced myself from during my relationship. With each new connection, I felt a part of myself returning, a part that had been stifled for too long. Daniel remained a steady presence in my life, though we were cautious about rushing into anything serious. His visits became more frequent, and each time we saw each other, it felt like we were building something meaningful. One evening, as we walked along the riverfront, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Emily, do you think you'll ever truly forgive them? Ethan and Claire." I paused, considering his question. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I admitted. "I've let go of the anger, and I don't wish them any harm. But I don't think I'll ever forget what they did, or the way it made me feel." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair. Forgiveness doesn't have to mean forgetting or excusing what happened. Sometimes it's just about freeing yourself from the hold it has on you." His words resonated deeply. I realized that I had already freed myself, not for their sake, but for mine. One afternoon, while cleaning out my apartment, I came across a box of memories from my time with Ethan. Photos, handwritten notes, souvenirs from trips we had taken together, they were all tucked away, gathering dust. For a moment, I debated whether to keep any of it. But as I flipped through the items, I realized that holding on to these remnants served no purpose. They didn't represent who I was now or the future I was building. I packed everything into a bag and took it to the recycling bin, feeling a surprising sense of closure as I walked away. Meanwhile, news about Claire began to trickle back through mutual acquaintances. She had started a new job and was reportedly keeping a low profile. Someone mentioned she was in therapy, working through the aftermath of what had happened. While I had no desire to reconnect with her, I hoped she was genuinely making an effort to grow. As for Ethan, I heard even less. The last I knew, he had moved to another city for work. Whether he was happy or not, I didn't care to know. Daniel and I eventually decided to take a leap of faith. He relocated to my city, and we moved in together. It was a big step, but one that felt right. Unlike my relationship with Ethan, which had been marked by subtle power struggles and unspoken doubts, my connection with Daniel was built on mutual respect and trust. He supported my independence, encouraged my ambitions, and never made me feel like I had to compete for his attention. In him, I found a partner who valued me for who I was, not just what I could offer. One day, as we were unpacking boxes in our new apartment, Daniel handed me a framed photo he had taken during one of his travels. It was a black and white shot of an empty bridge, shrouded in mist, with sunlight breaking through in the distance. "It reminded me of you," he said with a smile. "Why?" I asked, studying the image. "Because it's about moving forward," he said simply. I smiled, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." He pulled me into a hug, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for him, but for the journey that had brought me here. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal I once thought would break me had, in fact, shaped me into someone stronger and more resilient. It had taught me to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, and to never settle for less than I deserved. Life wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be. But it was mine to live on my own terms, surrounded by people who truly cared about me. And for the first time in years, that was enough. As the months passed, life settled into a beautiful routine. Daniel and I grew closer, and I found myself more at peace with the person I had become. I was no longer defined by the betrayal of the past, but by the strength and growth that followed it. With Daniel by my side, I felt truly supported in every way, emotionally, mentally, and even professionally. One evening, as we were cooking dinner together, Daniel looked at me with a soft smile. I never expected this. When we met in Venice, I didn't think it would turn into something this meaningful. I laughed, stirring the pot on the stove. Neither did I. But life works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I think sometimes the hardest things in life, the toughest lessons, are the ones that help us find what we're really looking for. I paused, looking up at him, struck by his words. I think you're right. I never would have found this peace, this happiness, without going through all the pain. As strange as it sounds, I'm grateful for the lessons. Daniel smiled, stepping closer. I'm glad you're where you are now, Emily. You deserve all the happiness in the world. I felt my heart swell with warmth. Daniel's support was everything I had missed in my previous relationships, the kind of love that was steady and genuine, without hidden agendas or betrayal. A few weeks later, Daniel and I decided to take a trip together, this time to the mountains. We both needed a break, a chance to disconnect from the everyday grind and explore new places together. It was a short escape, but it felt like the perfect way to continue building our bond. While hiking through a quiet trail surrounded by trees, Daniel stopped and turned to me. Emily, I have something I want to ask you. I raised an eyebrow, curious. What's that? He took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto mine. I know we've only been together for a short time, but I feel like we've built something truly special. And I'd like to spend the rest of my life with you. The world seemed to slow as he knelt on one knee, pulling out a small box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. Will you marry me, Emily? I stood frozen for a moment, my heart racing. This was the kind of moment I had dreamed of, without the shadows of the past haunting it. I looked into his eyes, feeling overwhelmed by the love and sincerity I saw there. Yes, I whispered, my voice shaking with emotion. Yes, Daniel, I will marry you. He stood up, pulling me into a tight embrace as I laughed through my tears. You've made me the happiest person alive, he said softly. And in that moment, I truly believed it. After everything I had gone through, the heartbreak, the healing, the growth, I had found someone who truly understood me, someone who loved me in the way I had always hoped for. As the months leading up to our wedding flew by, I found myself excited, not with anxiety or fear, but with anticipation for the future. The memories of my past with Ethan and Claire faded into the background. They no longer had the power to hold me back. On our wedding day, as I stood before the people I loved most, family, friends, and Daniel, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one where I could be unapologetically myself. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, a reflection of the love we had built over time. When Daniel and I exchanged vows, I couldn't help but think of how far I had come. I had endured betrayal, heartache, and self-doubt, but I had emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of what I deserved. And now, I was marrying the person who would be by my side for the rest of my life. "I promise to love you, support you, and stand by you," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. "I promise to be your partner, your best friend, and your greatest supporter, no matter what life brings us." Tears welled up in my eyes as I replied, "And I promise to do the same. To be with you through every joy, every challenge, and every moment in between. I choose you, Daniel, always." After the wedding, as we embarked on our honeymoon, I couldn't help but reflect on how much I had changed. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first met Ethan, nor was I the same person who had walked away from that betrayal months earlier. I had learned to trust again, to open myself up to love without fear. And most importantly, I had learned to love myself. With Daniel, I knew I had found a love that was real, a love that wasn't based on deception or hidden motives. It was a love built on honesty, respect, and understanding, everything I had always wanted, and everything I deserved. As we walked hand in hand down a quiet beach at sunset, I realized that this was the life I had always dreamed of. A life filled with love, adventure, and the kind of peace that only comes after a storm has passed. And while I would never forget the lessons the storm taught me, I was ready to leave the past behind and embrace the future. Together, Daniel and I were building something beautiful, something I could finally call home. After Emily married Daniel and began a new, happier life, Ethan and Claire seemed to move on, but karma lingered over them like a shadow they couldn't escape. Ethan, who had once tried to rebuild his relationship with Emily, finally realized the full extent of the damage he had caused. Although he moved to another city for a new job, the guilt that plagued him became unbearable. Every time he tried to open up to someone new, the ghost of Emily's absence haunted him. The guilt intensified when he heard from mutual friends that Emily had found true happiness with Daniel, someone who loved her the way she deserved, far better than Ethan ever did. One day, Ethan received bad news. His company went bankrupt. He lost his job, a job he had grown to rely on as a distraction from the reality of his failures. His poor decisions, especially regarding Emily and Claire, came to light in his personal and professional life. Karma didn't just affect his relationships. It bled into his career, leaving him adrift and struggling to find stability. On the other hand, Claire, despite appearing to have moved on, was increasingly uncomfortable with her life. After the events with Ethan and the betrayal she had caused Emily, Claire began to feel lost. Though she tried to start new relationships, she couldn't shake the sense of guilt. Her desire for validation and attention from men who never truly respected her left her feeling empty. Claire's life took a turn when she was fired from her job due to her toxic behavior and inability to handle stress and conflicts. Her colleagues began to distance themselves, realizing her manipulative and dishonest nature. Karma followed her everywhere, and she soon realized that the success she had hoped for was slipping through her fingers. In desperation, Claire tried reaching out to Emily, hoping to apologize and repair some of the damage, but Emily had already moved on. She refused to engage, fully committed to her new life. As both Ethan and Claire faced these hardships, they came to the painful realization that their actions had not only destroyed their relationship with Emily, but had also led to a life filled with consequences they hadn't anticipated. Karma wasn't just about damaged relationships. It showed up in their careers, their personal lives, and their ability to move forward. Emily, meanwhile, continued to move forward. She didn't dwell on the past, nor did she concern herself with the karma that was unfolding in Ethan and Claire's lives. With Daniel, she experienced the happiness and love she had longed for. Though she occasionally remembered the pain from the past, she knew that kindness and a life full of love were the best answers to any wounds. Thank you so much for following Emily's journey. Life can be unpredictable, and sometimes we have to face the consequences of our actions, but it's also about finding strength, healing, and embracing new beginnings. Emily's story is proof that, no matter how dark things may seem, there's always a way to move forward toward a brighter future. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more heartfelt journeys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates. Stay tuned for new stories, and as always, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. See you in the next one. And remember, it's never too late to turn the page and start a new chapter. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. Until then, take care.